Estelle, or Stell for short, was sitting in the hotel parking lot, checking her makeup in the visor mirror of her car. She wasn't driving some fancy luxury sedan or an exotic roadster. Instead, she had her trusty 10-year-old Ford Escape SUV. After making sure her makeup and hair looked perfect, she started the car to head home. The dashboard clock showed it was a little past 11 p.m. Since the drive home usually took about 15 minutes, she knew she'd be there soon, just as she had told her husband, Derrick. On her way home, Stell fidgeted slightly in the leather seat of the SUV, her thoughts wandering back to the last 4 hours spent in a hotel room with her lover. Austin was 6 years younger than her, tall, broad-shouldered, and athletic. They had met by chance at a Chamber of Commerce meeting 8 months ago. That encounter had led to friendly lunches, then dinners, and eventually intimate evenings at a downtown hotel. What began as casual meetings had evolved into regular nights, and sometimes even days, together, whenever the opportunity arose. As she pulled into the driveway, Stell noticed the dim glow of the television filtering through the curtains of the study window. Derrick was likely watching one of his Netflix shows, waiting for her to come inside. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, she got out of the car. Over the past few months, Stell had perfected her explanations about where she had been and who she was with. When Stell entered the house, she placed her purse on the hallway table and headed straight for the study. As expected, Derrick was there, sitting in front of the TV. "Did you have a good time?" he asked. Yeah, she replied. "Where'd you go?" "Had dinner at Roscoe's and then went to Club Bell for drinks," she said casually. "It was me, Erica, Teresa, and Julie." Derrick turned off the TV and stretched. "Let's head to bed. It's been a rough day. I had to fire Robert and Angie." Stell blinked in surprise.
"What? Why?"
Robert's wife found out he and Angie were involved. She hired a private investigator, filed for divorce, changed the locks, and kicked him out of the house. Since Robert was technically Angie's boss, their relationship broke our company's no fraternization policy. Firing them wasn't easy, but I had to do it because I run the department. "Wow, that seems harsh," Stell said, frowning. "Were they doing anything inappropriate during work hours?" "It doesn't matter," Derrick replied. "The whole situation created an uncomfortable environment, and my boss was adamant about it. His wife cheated on him, and even though they divorced, he's still bitter about infidelity." In the bedroom, Derrick changed into his usual nighttime attire, boxers and a t-shirt. Meanwhile, Stell pulled a modest nightgown from her dresser and went into the bathroom to change. She carefully wrapped her panties in a towel and tucked them at the bottom of the laundry basket. As she did so, her thoughts wandered back to Austin, his athletic build, and intense lovemaking. Returning to the bedroom, Stell found Derrick already lying under the covers. She slid onto her side of the bed, turned off the lamp, and snuggled up to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. Soon, both were sound asleep, their quiet snores filling the room. The next day, Stell had a fantastic day at work. Contracts for 2 houses were nearing completion, and she finalized a deal that netted her over $122,000 in profit. She also had 3 house showings scheduled for the day. Life was good. Since getting her broker's license and going independent, her income had tripled, matching Derrick's salary as an attorney. The closings went smoothly, and the management company assured her that her commission check would be deposited into her business account by the end of the day. After enjoying lunch at her favorite downtown restaurant, Stell returned to her office with a spring in her step and a smile on her face. As she walked through the front door, she noticed her young receptionist glancing up nervously. The fear in the woman's eyes was unusual and unsettling. Before Stell could ask what was wrong, a man stood up from a chair in the reception area and called out to her. "Estelle," he said firmly. Startled, Stell turned to him. It wasn't common for anyone to call her by her full name. "Yes?" she asked, trying to remain calm. "Can I help you?" "May I see some identification, please?" the man replied. "For what?" Stell asked, narrowing her eyes. "It's a matter of legality and requirements," the man said with a sigh. "What legality?" she demanded, her voice rising slightly. The man sighed again, clearly preparing to explain. Ma'am, I need to confirm your identity before proceeding with our case, the man said firmly. A flash of displeasure crossed Stell's face, but she retrieved her driver's license from her purse and handed it to him. He compared it to the note card attached to the heavy manila envelope he held. It dawned on Stell that this was a process server. This wasn't unusual. Legal documents were often delivered to her real estate agency. She relaxed slightly as he handed her license back along with a thick envelope. Miss Matt, you've been served, the man said, his tone almost apologetic. Thank you. I think, she replied dryly, assuming it was from a dissatisfied client. The man gave her a brief, almost pitying look before turning and leaving the office quickly. Stell watched him go for a moment before heading to her desk. She placed her purse on the bookshelf, sat down, and tossed the envelope onto her desk. Before opening it, she dealt with a few urgent messages and checked her email. She frowned as she read a cancellation notice for one of the evening's scheduled showings, a disappointment for her productive day. Finally, she turned her attention to the envelope. Guessing it was some routine lawsuit related to her business, Stell opened it and slid out a thick stack of papers. Her slight smile vanished as her eyes fell on the bold title on the first page, Dissolution of Marriage. Grabbing the papers, she scanned them quickly. Her name and Derrick's were written clearly. A sob escaped her throat as she pieced together the meaning. What the hell, she whispered. Derrick had filed for divorce. Reading further, her breath caught when she saw the reason listed: adultery. A cold shiver ran down her spine. No, she murmured. There's no way. I've been too careful. He couldn't know. Tossing the papers aside, her hand landed on another item inside the envelope, a stack of glossy 8 by 10 photographs. Dread washed over her as she flipped through them. The images were graphic, photos of her and Austin in compromising positions, clearly taken during their trysts. The look of ecstasy on her face in the pictures deepened her nausea. Turning abruptly, Stell emptied the remains of her expensive lunch into the trash can. Grabbing a napkin, she wiped her mouth, her hands trembling. Oh my God, she whispered through tears. Derrick knows about Austin. Her mind racing, Stell picked up her phone and dialed Austin's number from memory. To her shock, a pleasant automated voice informed her that the number was no longer in service. Confused, she tried his work number at the accounting firm. Higgins, Clark, and Proper Accounting. How may I assist you? The receptionist answered. Austin Dickerson, please, Stell said, trying to keep her voice steady. I'm sorry, ma'am. He no longer works here, the receptionist replied. Stell froze, stunned into silence. The receptionist's voice continued. Can I forward your call to someone else? Stell hung up without responding. Grabbing her purse, she hastily stuffed the papers and photos back into the envelope. Running past her own receptionist, she called out, Crystal, cancel all my appointments. I'm not coming back today.
Confronting Austin.
Across town, Stell brought her car to an abrupt halt in front of Austin's mansion. Rushing to the door, she jabbed the doorbell repeatedly and, without waiting, began pounding on the door.
Austin.
Austin, open the damn door, she shouted, her voice frantic. After nearly 10 minutes of this, the deadbolt clicked and the door swung open. Austin stood there, looking like a shadow of the man she once knew. His face was pale, his posture slouched, and his expression devoid of emotion. A wistful, almost resigned look filled his eyes. Stell gasped at the sight of him. What's wrong with you? What happened? Without stepping aside or inviting her in, Austin spoke slowly and without feeling. I was fired today. The moment I walked into the office, they handed me my termination papers. They said my behavior had brought the firm into disrepute. What? Stell exclaimed. No warning, no severance, and no promise of a reference. They made it clear I'd have to start over somewhere else. Her heart pounded. What did you do? Why would they? Austin interrupted her with a bitter laugh. I guess you haven't figured it out yet. I slept with the wrong married woman, Austin said flatly. According to Jeff Parsons, a senior partner at the firm, who, by the way, plays golf with your husband nearly every Saturday, having an affair with a married woman is completely unacceptable, especially if her husband is a close friend of the boss. Stell slumped against the doorframe as nausea swept over her. Austin's voice broke through her shock. "Go away, Stell. Don't come back. My life is a wreck right now," he said, his tone cold and detached. Before she could respond, the door slammed shut in her face. She leaned against it and wailed, "Austin, don't send me away. Please, I need you. Derrick has filed for divorce, and I have nowhere else to go." From inside, Austin's voice replied, sharp and unyielding, "I don't care, Stell. You can't stay here." His words echoed in her ears as she stumbled back to her car. Sitting in the driver's seat, she stared blankly ahead, trying to piece together her next steps. It took all her strength to start the car. With no clear destination in mind, she drove aimlessly until she suddenly realized where she was. Her subconscious had brought her home. Derrick's car wasn't parked in its usual spot, so she pulled into the garage, closed the door behind her, and stepped into the silent, dark house. Tossing her purse on the kitchen table, she stood there miserably, staring into the empty room. A flicker of hope stirred as a thought struck her. She rushed to the master bedroom and let out a sigh of relief when she saw Derrick's suits and clothes still hanging in the closet, his toiletries still in the bathroom. At least he hadn't moved out yet. Much later, Stell heard the front door unlock and creak open. From the kitchen, she saw Derrick place his briefcase in the hallway and head straight to the refrigerator. He poured himself a glass of Scotch whiskey, then walked into the living room, ice clinking softly in his glass. He finally turned to her. His face was calm, but his eyes were cold. Startled, Stell stood up. "Derrick, I can explain. This is all nonsense." Derrick took a slow sip of his scotch, then pointed to the small breakfast table by the bay window. "Sit," he said firmly. Stell recognized that tone, calm, controlled, and cutting, the same voice he used when dismantling opponents in court. She obeyed, sitting down as Derrick followed. "Nothing," he said finally, his tone laced with sarcasm. "I suppose this is no different from the year and a half you spent with Vincent, or the 2 years with Carrie, or the fun you had with Peter. Compared to those, I guess the past few months with Austin were practically nothing." Stell's breath caught. Her face paled as she realized Derrick knew everything. Not just about Austin, everything. Seeing her reaction, Derrick pressed on, his voice unwavering. "Was it anything more than convenience when you used Jackson to start your agency?" Her head shook furiously in denial, but no words came out, only muffled sobs. Derrick waited until her sobs quieted. "You'll pack your things and leave tonight," he said coldly. "If you can't take everything, I'll have my lawyer arrange for the rest to be delivered." "You broke my heart, Stell. You used to be a kind, loving wife. Now you're nothing but a greedy, manipulative stranger. I don't even recognize you anymore. And I don't want to." Tears streamed down her face as she choked out, "Derrick, please. I have nowhere to go. Go to Austin's. Or maybe not. You've already been there, haven't you? He's not having a great day himself." With that, Derrick left, slamming the door behind him. Stell sat alone in the dark, feeling the weight of her world collapsing around her. Taking a deep breath, she dragged herself upstairs to pack. She carefully selected clothes, toiletries, and a few keepsakes, all while trying to bring some order to the chaos in her mind. By the time 2 suitcases were packed and placed by the garage door, her initial shock had given way to anger. She poured herself a glass of whiskey, sat at the kitchen table, and pulled the divorce papers out of her purse. As she read them carefully, fury welled up inside her. "What a son of a," she muttered bitterly to the empty house. Her hands trembled as she realized Derrick had orchestrated this for years. He'd played the long game, biding his time and setting everything in motion. She thought back to when she decided to start her own agency. Derrick had been so supportive, offering to handle all the legal work. Little did she know he had a hidden agenda. Stell had never realized the truth behind her business. The LLC she thought she owned was actually controlled by a trust, and Derrick was the sole trustee. Everything she had poured her time and energy into over the past 6 years, her real estate agency, her plans, her dreams, was entirely out of her control. The house, the cars, even the retirement beach house. All of it belonged to the legal partnership Derrick had established. His pension, which she had thought would provide for them both, was practically non-existent. Instead, he had been funneling funds into trust accounts for their grandchildren, leaving her with nothing. For the past 2 years, Derrick had been working in a partnership for a fraction of his worth, hiding the rest of his earnings in the trust. She had her personal cash accounts and credit cards, but the divorce papers made it clear. Derrick intended to take everything from her. His aim was to leave her destitute, stripped of everything she thought she owned. Stell stared at the divorce papers, her simmering anger transforming into white-hot hatred. Everyone she had trusted had turned their backs on her. Austin had discarded her the moment things got difficult. Derrick, her husband of so many years, had been plotting behind her back, setting the stage for this moment for years. As she drank glass after glass of scotch, her fury became cold and calculating. By the time the bottle was empty, her mind was clear, and her rage was focused. If Derrick wanted war, she would bring it to him on her terms. He had taken everything she cared about, her marriage, her lover, her business, her future. With nothing left to lose, Stell felt cornered, but that only made her more determined. It took her only minutes to devise a plan. If Derrick could drop bombs, she would retaliate with nuclear weapons. Grim and resolute, she made 2 phone calls to set things in motion. Then she gathered what she needed, sat at the kitchen table, and waited. Derrick arrived 2 hours later, answering her call despite his initial hesitation. She had pleaded with him to talk one last time before leaving, and though he had been reluctant, he couldn't deny the faint feelings he still had for her. When Derrick entered the house, he was struck by the stillness. The darkness of the home was unsettling. As he stepped into the kitchen, he saw Stell sitting at the table, a silhouette against the dim light. Her voice reached him, soft yet strangely slurred. "Come in, darling."
Sit down.
"I drank all the scotch, so you'll have to find something else." Derrick hesitated but replied calmly, "I'm fine." "Then sit down," Stell said, her tone unnervingly steady. "We'll start in just a minute." Nodding, Derrick pulled out a chair and sat across from her. On the table, he noticed the heavy envelope containing the divorce papers, alongside an empty whiskey bottle and a glass. Stell seemed eerily calm, almost relaxed. For 10 long minutes, they sat in silence. Stell's eyes never left Derrick, studying him intently. Derrick, growing uneasy, glanced around the room in confusion when the doorbell rang. Before he could move, Stell called out, "Come in, Austin." Derrick froze in shock as Austin, Stell's most recent lover, entered the room. The look on Austin's face when he saw Derrick was almost comical. He appeared stunned, as if he had walked into a trap. "Austin," Stell said, her voice light but sharp, "come in and have a seat." Austin, moving as if in a daze, crossed the room and sat at the table. Stell smiled faintly, her voice dripping with bitter sarcasm.
"Good.
"We're all here. What lovely company." She paused, letting the tension in the room build before continuing. "I just want you both to know how much I appreciate finally discovering who you really are. One of you is a whiny, predatory jerk. The other is a sneaky, cowardly bastard. I'll let you two decide which is which." Her words hung in the air, cutting deep. "My business is gone. My lover is no longer my lover. My husband has declared he is no longer my husband. At this point, I am completely alone, in need of nothing, and feeling nothing for either of you." She turned her sharp gaze to Derrick. "Derrick, I can't believe you went to such lengths to set all this up. Why didn't you just talk to me when you found out about Jackson?" "We could have worked it out," Stell said, her voice calm but edged with regret. "It shouldn't have come to this." Derrick shook his head, his tone as resolute as ever. "There was no coming back from this, Stell. You know how I feel about loyalty. When you let Jackson touch you in his office, that was it. It was over between us. I just had to protect myself." Stell's eyes lit up briefly, though Derrick didn't notice. She turned to Austin. "And you? I thought we had something." Austin chuckled bitterly. "We did. We had amazing sex. Unfortunately, It cost me far more than it was worth. The smile that spread across Stell's face should have been a warning. But Austin saw it as agreement, and Derrick mistook it for her determination to reconcile. Neither man understood what it truly meant. Before either could react, Stell reached under the table, pulled Derrick's 9mm Sig Sauer from her lap, and pointed it at Austin. There was no hesitation. The sharp bark of the gun shattered the silence, and Austin collapsed backward, lifeless, his chair tipping over with a thud. With a swift, almost casual movement, Stell turned the gun on Derrick. Derrick had just begun to rise from his chair, reacting instinctively to the first shot. But he barely had time to stand before the next bullet hit him squarely in the chest, a 9mm hollow point straight to the heart. He staggered sideways, collapsing onto the floor. His body stretched out unnaturally, and he didn't move again. The kitchen fell silent. Stell stood still, the weight of the gun heavy in her hand. Her gaze shifted between the two lifeless bodies sprawled across the floor. Then her eyes landed on the two suitcases by the door. She pondered her options. She could call 911, sit patiently, and face the consequences, a trial, the media frenzy, and inevitable jail time. She could press the barrel of the gun to her temple or her mouth, and everything right here, and join the two men on the floor. Or she could grab the suitcases, the $100,000 hidden in the safe, her passport and the gun, and disappear to an unknown destination. Escape wasn't guaranteed. She might succeed, or she might fail. But it was a chance. Raising the empty glass to her lips, Stell drank the last bitter drops of whiskey, as if savoring the final act of her former life. The decision was hers to make.